Okay, a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us this afternoon or this evening or this morning. We know many of you are joining us from near and far. Thank you for joining this Mind and Life Europe talk. This talk is part of the Mind and Life Europe Mind Matters series, which was initiated in 2020, which provides a virtual platform for some of the world's leading figures in Buddhism, philosophy, and the contemplative sciences. And so today we have the pleasure and the honor of welcoming a good friend of MLE, Venerable Dr. Barry Kerzin, to offer a sharing and an informal talk with us called No Center, No Edge, Letting Go of a Fixed Identity. So I'd like to just briefly introduce Venerable Dr. Barry Kerzin, for those of you who don't know him and his work, and then we will ease into the conversation with Dr. Kerzin. So Venerable Dr. Barry Kerzin is a medical doctor, a Buddhist monk, an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh and at HKU, and an honorary professor at the Mongolian National University of Medical Sciences. He's the founder and president of the Altruism in Medicine Institute and the founder and chairman of the Human Values Institute in Japan. For 33 years, he's been providing free medical care in India, to the poor and also to high lamas, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He offers trainings in compassion for over 18,000 nurses at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, the Pittsburgh Police, and the Pittsburgh Parks and Recreation Department. He also lectures and teaches all around the world, and so we're lucky to have him for an hour and a half today with us. Barry has completed a 3-year retreat, and his brain has been studied at Princeton University and the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And finally, he's also the author of 4 books. So Barry, thank you so much for joining us this evening from India and for this moment of sharing about no center, no edge, letting go of a fixed identity. So maybe just to get us started into this moment of sharing, you can just take us back to the genesis of this idea, the theme, and also just the title that you've put together for this evening.
Thank you, Johanna. I'm very honored and very happy to be together with Mind and Life Europe once again. We're developing a lovely relationship. It sort of feels good. I don't have anything prepared, which is a little unusual for me. Usually I'm lecturing from slides, but I didn't want to do that this evening, or for many of you this afternoon. I wanted to just sort of look at some reflections of some things that have been coming up in my life, and particularly in my practice the last several months. And it has a genesis of maybe 20 years, actually. But I think it was dormant for a long time. So let me say a little bit more about that, the genesis. I did the 3-year retreat a little over 20 years ago. And prior to that, I was for several decades quite interested in studying Madhyamaka and trying to, get a little bit of an intellectual handle on it, not so easy. And then try to take it into meditation and try to develop a little bit of experience of shunyata. And I can say that maybe there was a little bit, you kind of learn a little bit, you experience a little bit, you think you sort of have some kind of understanding, and then shortly thereafter, reading or meditating or reflecting, you find, well, that wasn't quite right, so that happens a lot. So there certainly was no final sort of epiphany, anything like that, but some little bit of experience. Then I did a 3-year retreat in the Dzogchen tradition. And after that retreat, when I was back to my kind of Madhyamaka practice in meditation, I found that things were very fuzzy and not very clear and almost confused. And so I had this lovely chance to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's one of my very dear, close Dalai Lama lamas, and asked him about this. And he basically said to me, please do not do both practices, the Madhyamaka more analytical approach and the Dzogchen more just letting go, being with the vast, open, mind. Do them not together, do them at different times. And so, of course, I took his advice. That was a couple of years ago, maybe a little over 20 years ago. And slowly over months, maybe a couple of years, some of the clarity in the Madhyamaka approach the little bit that I had prior to doing the Dzogchen retreat, long retreat, started to come back. And now, after maybe 20 years later, I find that when I do my Madhyamaka and I try to rest in the absence of trying to identify that berry that is on its own. I like the way Jeffrey puts that, Jeffrey Hopkins, more recently, last few years, on its own. We say from its own side and objective and independent, but on its own kind of it's simpler and it's more direct, I think, in terms of trying to experience that. So trying to identify that berry on its own and then negate that. And there are many arguments, it's either, the classic way is, which I follow, it has to be you look to see if the berry in this case, is the same or different from its basis, which are its aggregates, basically, the body and the mind. And there are many logical inconsistencies, contradictions to both approaches, if it's the same or if it's different. If it's the same, there's a number, difference. They can't be identical because there's a number of things in this body-mind complex, whereas berry is solo one, and then it also would make no sense to say berry because it would be redundant if it's identical with body and mind. When the body and mind would arise, abide, and disintegrate, the I would similarly arise, abide, disintegrate, which is not correct. It's contradictory. And if it's different, it has to be totally different, because we're talking about a berry that's on its own, right? So it can't have any relationship to anything. So therefore they have to be completely separate or different, the berry and its basis, my body, my mind. And then you'd have to say, you couldn't say my body, my mind, my knee hurts. I'm feeling slightly uncomfortable, not knowing where I'm going with this talk, but also a lot of joy to be together with you all. You couldn't say that because there would be no relationship between my feelings or my thoughts or my mind and berry. So there are a number of contradictions that occur if berry is either the same or different from its basis, my body, my mind. And then you have to kind of convince yourself that there's no other choice. It has to be the same or different. There's no wiggle room here. There's no, kind of something in between. And so you go through that a bit to try to gain a little confidence that those are the only two possibilities. And then if you've, again and again and again, you've exhaustively tried to search for where is this berry that's on its own, and you really, it doesn't make sense that it's identical. It doesn't make sense that it's totally separate. No other third possibility. So you begin to come to the experiential conclusion, and this takes a lot of time, and I'm not there yet. I'm just on the path, working at this stuff, but you sort of come then to the kind of experiential conclusion, well, in that case, this berry that I've always taken to be so real, it can't exist because, we've looked everywhere, right? And so that's led me in the last few months to sort of have this sense that normally berry, so trying to refine a little bit, this berry that appears to be on its own. It's not hard. It's not easy. It's hard. It's not easy to identify that. And yet that you have to do because that's the target. And if you don't have a somewhat clear target, your analysis is kind of, it's like putting up a card, castle or a castle in sand when the tide comes in or the wind blows. Yeah. So you really have to you have to again and again try to understand, try to recognize, the appearance of berry, without thinking about it, without analyzing, you just say berry and see what comes up, and again and again and again. And so what's been happening the last few months is that there's this sense that berry, that one that appears, it has a perspective. Yeah. It has almost it's not quite visual, it's not quite through the eyes. It's more, I guess, a feeling. Maybe it's that I'm kind of here and I'm looking out. Generally, it's in front of me. Yeah. I'm not generally looking out behind me. So it's sort of visual, but it's not the eyes. And usually not so much the sides up or down. It's more kind of out in front. So there's this sense of this berry that appears on its own, that has a perspective that I'm here and everything else is kind of in front. Maybe if I give it a little thought, it's all around, but it's kind of out there in front. There's this perspective. So there's kind of a center. And because there's a center, there's sort of an edge, stuff out there, kind of. And that's seeming more and more false to me. It's uncomfortable. It seems very artificial. So if I look at that aspect of the appearing berry, which is, on its own, right, from its own side, independent, objective, all that stuff. And it has this sort of perspective of me here and everything else out in front, kind of. That seems very artificial, very false. So if I begin to say, okay, well, maybe that's part of this sort of, berry on its own, objective without relating to anything else. So then I begin to try to drop that perspective a little bit. First, primarily, it's more intellectual, but I try to take it into meditation to have a little bit of an experience or taste. What would that be like if I dropped that perspective of me here and everything kind of out there, sort of in front of me? And that's how I kind of came to this notion, which I've been kind of pondering for a few months now, no center, me here, and then no edge, you and everybody in the world and the universe out there. So that's how I've kind of come to this, and I'm playing with it. I'm pondering it. I'm seeing where it goes. And I found a potential danger. There may be others. And that potential danger is to get kind of in a state of lumitin, where we sort of are spaced out, where you lose your clarity. Because in the state of being spaced out, or so-called lumitin, there is no center, there is no edge, but you're sort of half asleep. You've lost your clarity. So that's not really where we want to be. So that's a potential pitfall we want to avoid. So it's a little bit like coming home again. It's a circle. Because when this starts to happen in my meditation with a little bit of prodding, and then sometimes not much prodding, it's a little bit coming full circle, because this is more of the, this is more of the method or the approach of, traditions that try to just let the natural mind, the deeper mind manifest, because it's always there. I try not to disturb things and let it come out, which is, kind of the general approach in Dzogchen, Mahamudra, and probably in Zen, Zazen sitting. Though I'm no expert in any of this stuff. So these are just reflections. These are just some initial ponderings that's happening in my life, particularly in my practice and in my meditation. Yeah. So I'd like to sit with you for a couple moments, if you wouldn't mind. Let's kind of just drop in. You know what I mean? Drop in. Allow your mind to deeply relax without getting dull or sleepy. If thoughts come up, and they likely will, try not to follow them. Try not to make and elaborate stories. If a sound comes up or a tactile sensation, my bum is a little sore, whatever. Try to just let it flow. Try not to grasp it. Try not to, embellish it. And just try to sit comfortably. So maybe we'll do this for just a couple minutes, please. Now maybe we can come out of our meditation and try to keep that relaxed state, maybe spacious state of mind. Maybe we can use the words nondual in terms of no recognition of subject, myself, or object, anything out there. And in that sense, letting go of a fixed identity. In that sense, no center, no edge. And just keep that warm and maybe in the upper center of the chest kind of area. I wonder, Gabor, Amy, Johanna, Charlotte, Derek, any reflections, anything come up, anything that you'd like to say?
Yes, thank you, Barry. Amy, maybe you wanna.
I was just struck, Barry, by words that you said. You said it was like coming home again. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that.
It's interesting you've picked up on that phrase, Amy. So I do a little bit of posting on Facebook twice a week, and I've been sometimes talking about that theme of coming home. I think, after practice for decades, you develop a little bit of a place in here that's safe, that's warm, joyous without excitement, but just inviting, and in a way that's kind of home. I don't have a physical home. I live in 2 rooms that are offered to me by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, inside of his compound, the Ganapotang. But they're not mine. I have no other house, and I, pre-COVID and now starting up a little bit now, again, I travel quite a bit, usually half of the year. So in a sense, airplane is kind of home, airports are kind of home. And this place inside that's there, that comes up, not always, but sometimes in meditation, it's more pronounced, becomes kind of home. And so coming home is to this place of tranquility, joy, maybe a bit of openness, vastness, a little bit. So it's a little bit like that, I think.
You mentioned, Barry, this also in the title, letting go of a fixed identity. It seems we live in an era where identity has become more important than ever. Everything is about identity. Politically, socially, culturally, we want to achieve some identity. We want to create some identity. We want to find some identity. So letting go of a fixed identity may pose not only a question, but a huge risk. Living without that quest, without that social, cultural initiative. Do you see a risk in letting go of one's fixed identity? And how would you interpret this notion of risk around that?
Yes, of course, there's a risk. It's scary. Okay. Two things come up, Gabor. Maybe I'll just address those two, at least to start. First, for many years, my practice of medicine is not traditional in the sense of, going to the office, being in the hospital with the patient. I mean, I do that latter occasionally, but very seldom. And so I don't have that same behavior as a lot of my colleagues who are physicians who, go to the office every day, go to the hospital, make rounds, see their sick patients like that. And so I've been trying for, 20, 30 years, maybe more, 20, 30 years probably, to what feels like taking off layers of the onion of an identity as a physician. It's not like I'm saying I'm not, because I am a physician, but there's a lot of junk, overlay that comes with that. And it's more that junk overlay that I've been trying to peel away, and then you peel it away and it comes back, and you peel it away and it comes back again. But you keep working on it. And, I've taken off some of the layers of that. So I don't, sometimes when, in India, people call me often Dr. Barry, and sometimes when I'm not like engaged with someone, maybe from a distance or from the side, they see me and they say, "Hey, Dr. Barry." And my immediate reaction sometimes is, "Oh, where's Dr. Barry?" I'm not talking about Buddhism or anything. It's just, that's my reaction. It's like, I don't see myself sometimes as Dr. Barry. So that's the first thing. The second thing about risk and fear of trying to slowly whittle down, reduce this fixed identity of self. When was this? 38 years ago. I was attending a lecture by a great Lama, and I was interested in Buddhism. I had done some reading, but I didn't know much at all. I mean, I don't know much now, but I knew much less then. I was really a beginner, very beginner, very beginner. And I heard this lecture on shunyata. And after the lecture, this was in Nepal, and after the lecture, we had lunch, and I went up this rudimentary ladder, basically a tree with notches, to sit on the roof and eat my lunch. And while I was sitting there, I had these two powerful daydreams, you can call them hallucinations, something that I have not had previous nor afterwards. And the first one was a water buffalo. My eyes were open. I was sitting there eating my lunch, and I saw this huge water buffalo. And then I saw a sword come and diagonally slice open this water buffalo, and blood was going everywhere. I thought I was going crazy, right? And then that seemed to calm down. And then I had another hallucination of a Native American teepee. And eyes are open, daytime, no drugs, and I saw myself climbing up this Native American teepee. And I knew why I was doing that. It was very clear to me. And the reason was that I wanted to get to the top of the teepee, look inside to see what's inside of Barry. And I saw myself climbing, and then I saw myself getting to the top, and I can even see it right now. It was extremely vivid. I looked inside from the top of this teepee, and there's nothing in there. And I actually freaked. I started shaking. My heart was pounding. I thought I was going to jump out of my chest. I'm sweating. And there were some other people on that roof. They must have seen that looked like I'm in a little trouble. They came over and they said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't know." I was deeply frightened by the fact that there was nothing there that I could say was Barry, and I felt like I didn't exist. It was not intellectual. It was experiential, and I freaked. I got so frightened. And the people kind of gently got me down, in this funky little ladder notched, log onto the ground and laid me down on a little bit of kind of grass stuff. And slowly this kind of panic dissipated, it reduced and then dissipated. But that experience came every day for months, not as intense, but, for probably weeks, if not months. And then I had a chance a year, maybe a couple years later, to see His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and ask him, what's going on here? And he was very happy. And he said, "Wonderful, wonderful." He said I had gone a little too far, just a little bit too far, that experientially I negated. And I wasn't trying to do anything. This just happened to me, right? But he said, you experientially negated everything, such that you felt, your experience was there was no Barry at all. You were totally non-existent. And he said, "Please come back just a little bit." And so I've been working on that ever since. And haven't gotten very far, but I keep working on it. So the risk is there can be panic if we go too far in terms of letting go of this so-called fixed identity to the point where we think that we don't exist at all. Now, probably for most of us, it's not going to be that radical. It may just be that, like you sort of alluded to, Gabor, that socially we're going to be kind of awkward. We don't know where to fit in. We don't have that personal identity, which relates to social structure and other people and groups and things like that. So yes, there is that potential risk. If we do this, with guidance and in a proper way, according to, authentic tradition, the gains are so astounding that it may be worth it.
Thank you very much. Before opening up to questions from our friends here in the Zoom room, I may just ask another question if you don't mind. And please, Amy, Johanna, any of you feel free to follow with your questions. I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about this notion of the center and this notion of the edge. No center, no edge. Would that mean, or does that mean that we can consider the center as an edgy place, and that when we are at the edge and we feel at the edge, we stand at the edge, whether we see a potential fall or risk there, we should just simply remind ourselves that that's also the center. So the center is the edge and the edge is the center.
That's an interesting notion, very interesting notion. What came to mind was Carlos Castaneda, and just allowing oneself to, jump off the mountain, the cliff, that one will be able to fly. I'm not suggesting people jump off the mountain, please, but that's kind of what came to mind. A bit of confidence that if we let go of these, focal points, be it center or edge, and they can sometimes be, the edge can seem like a center and the center maybe then an edge. but letting go of those things, and probably not all at once, but moving in that direction, again, can be very scary. And that's also okay. And again, we have to do it, I think, carefully. We have to do it with, proper guidance and a tradition that is sound and authentic. We don't want to harm ourselves. And I think this is a stepwise, many step in this stepwise process. It doesn't happen boom like jumping off a mountain. But I think it can also be healing, Gabor, because sometimes the fixed notions that we have of ourselves, and there are many of them, kind of harbor a lot of grief and discomfort and pain and hurt. And so part of this is, I think, healing. There's a term that I sometimes use, particularly in Japan and sometimes outside of Japan, which is the spiritual samurai warrior. To have that courage and that strength of a samurai, not to kill others, but, to begin to slay all that junk that we have inside of us, which is often so wrapped up in ego and fixed personal identity.
Thank you so much. I may come back with some more questions later on, and let's just see, Johanna, you may have a question, and then I would like to invite everyone here to think about questions, indicate your intention, either in the chat or just raising your hand. Johanna.
Just really briefly before we open up the Q&A, but I wanted to sort of pull on these two threads of really what you embody, Barry, which is the physician and the monk, and to hear you speak a little bit more about how that is as an embodied experience for you, because it seems that the medical arts and wisdom traditions maybe used to be much more closely tied together in previous eras, a lot of, very much in ancient times, but no longer is the case today. So you seem to be a very rare example of this negotiation or this tension between these two seemingly very divergent realms. So I'd just love to hear you speak about that experientially. How is that for you?
For a long time, Johanna, when people would ask me a question, if it was something about, well, how does science look at, something about the mind or meditation or death or things, I would say, well, I put on my medical hat and then give a standard, or maybe not standard, but, using a lot of medical terminology answer. And then if someone asked about, well, how does that set with Buddhist philosophy or psychology or, something about the nature of the mind, I'd say, well, if I put my monk hat on, and then use kind of more Buddhist terminology. A number of years ago, this just happened. I didn't, it just was kind of a natural evolution, I guess. No longer said that, and no longer felt this dichotomy of, oh, this is the doctor speaking or this is the monk speaking. So I probably sound a little weird to a lot of my medical colleagues. In fact, I'm sure I do. And sometimes I probably sound a little weird to a lot of my monastic colleagues, but and this may just be senility as I get older, Johanna, just losing sort of distinctions maybe. Yeah, I mean, I'm very comfortable with, modern medicine not having all the answers. I mean, modern medicine is incredible. Please don't get me wrong. It's incredible, but there are so many areas where We just don't know. And one of the areas particularly is about the mind, there are a few medical scientists or healthcare scientists or, researchers that are beginning to come around to understand that mind is a whole different ball of wax than the brain. It's an emergent property. It's still the common, more evolved scientific, understanding. And yet that's still physical, yeah. Even if it's energy, that's physical. Even if it's very subtle energy. Of course, there is that, but then there's this component that's experience, that's really mind. The two go together, but they're not the same. So, I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, maybe a lot. Yeah, so I think a little bit like that. So I think it's woven a sort of pattern within me, these two traditions that are often inform each other. Sometimes they're not the same, sometimes they overlap, sometimes they have different voices looking at something maybe similar from slightly different perspectives, and there's no contradiction there. So I think something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Janina Marguch, you were the first one who showed your interest in asking a question. So please, and then some others.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, actually, my question sort of builds upon Gabor's earlier question. And I was wondering about the social aspects of that identity, because in your answer, you mostly seem to focus on, the fear part of yourself, of letting go of that identity. But then I was wondering about the need, what you think about the need to have something in communication. Because, for example, if you look at yourself, you're wearing a robe, people know on the outside immediately you're a Buddhist monk, or many people will probably know. So there is some kind of identity that others can ascribe to you. And so they can deal with it. So I'm wondering, what if you didn't wear that? And how would you think about that social aspect of the identity and just the simple need to be able to communicate? Or that other people might expect you to say, oh, there's I, Barry, or, I, the monk, or I, the doctor. It was a bit answered in the last question, but maybe you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, thank you, Janina. It's a wonderful question, and there are times when I go out and I'm not in my robes, particularly if I'm doing some exercise or something, and it's not too cold. I may be in shorts and a t-shirt or something, and I notice. So when I'm in my robes, there's kind of almost an expected response from many people. I mean, most people, there's nothing, right? If I don't know people. But, there are people occasionally that do a double take up and down, maybe twice or thrice. They don't get it. What is this? Yeah. There are others that relate to it very positively. And sometimes people will do this. Maybe say something, often not. Sometimes it may be just a smile. And when I'm not in my robes, which is much less of the time, but sometimes, I notice that I feel like I'm much more anonymous. I'm not getting reactions from people as I do when I'm in my robes. So I've noticed that distinction. Sometimes it's a bit of a relief and kind of a joy not to be seen, as you will, to be more anonymous. I appreciate that because sometimes there's some work involved in really paying attention when I'm in public, and if noticing if someone is making some kind of a positive, to respect that and to reciprocate. But other times it's a little bit like I feel a little lost. It's like, where's Barry here, the monk Barry. So I think there's that, experience that I have in those two situations. I don't think it's a radical jumping off where you just sort of, find the trash can and you throw away your identity. Can't do that. So I think it is all these little steps. And I think if we embark on that journey or continue along that journey, there's something about it's something more real. I used the word artificial before, and less artificial. And I think that some people kind of relate to that. So it may be that our groups of friends, not overnight, but slightly shift a little bit. Maybe people that are on some kind of a journey where they're trying to be more honest, more real, and not just buy into all the assumptions that we make about ourselves without thinking about them. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't have, there's a lot of this that I'm still pondering. Yeah,
I was just thinking about the basic kind of need to, even the friends that might be on the same path. I mean, actually, those might not be, but those who aren't, because you still kind of need to introduce yourself as something, right? If you're meeting someone, or yeah. I'm Barry, or I'm. So it seems that it's almost easy to be in a context like this, or not easy, but easier to be in a context like this and say, there's no edge, no center, and people might be able to deal with it. Whereas if you're in a very different context, that might be harder for. So then I'm wondering, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah. So I still say I'm a physician when people ask, or, contextually, but a lot of that overlay that I've had for years that I've slowly reduced somewhat is not there when I say I'm a physician. Mm-hmm. So, as you heard from Johanna, I'm working a lot in the world, and, particularly when I'm working with healthcare people, I think it's important that they know I'm a physician, because they feel that they can relate better, particularly someone in a red dress, right? And so, I let them know. And then as I speak, they know I'm a physician, because, the terminology and the way you approach things. But so I think that's important. It's helpful for people to not push away, but feel some connection, and then maybe some more openness. And generally, we talk about compassion and mindfulness and stuff to, be more healthy and happy, and to reduce and prevent burnout. So I do use those terms. It's just that I think they're a little bit less laden with all those layers of the onion that we talked about before. So it's not that I go around always in this state of, no center, no edge, and deliver lectures or talk to people. No, but so yeah, it's like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janina. Leslie.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Well.
Hi, Barry. It's nice to see you, and thank you for being here.
Very good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you. My question is also a little bit about identity, but from a different angle. Because as a psychoanalyst, I might say identity is grounding, and it's something that carries us. And so my question is, when you speak about taking away the layers of the onion and approaching something that maybe is what you called home, granted, there are risks. There are always risks when we step away from our grounded identity, and you very beautifully described that experience that you had. But would you say that having an identity is antithetical to the experience of home that one might reach in meditation, or not? And you also described very well having that identity, but not being locked into that identity, your double identity. So all those are notions that maybe you can say a few words about.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful questions. Maybe it's more of a shift of identity. I mean, let me use a little different terminology. Not taking ourself so real. So there's still identity, but it's softer. It's without the elbows out, so to speak. Taking things much less personally, being less of the time me focused, but sometimes, considering, the welfare of others. So there's still a sense of an identity, but it's softening, it's shifting, it's changing. So I wouldn't say that. So remember, the title was letting go of a fixed identity. And I think to be more fluid about the identity, fixed sort of also implies that we're holding something tight, and that often gets us into trouble. So it's not letting go of the identity per se, but rather more the fixation. And so we then shift or sort of start to move towards an identity that's a little bit more fluid, is softer. Maybe something like that.
Perhaps towards the experience of nondual, of some sort of. I get an impression of movement, of, as you say, fluidity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the non-dual state is something that we, are working with in our more contemplative or meditative practice. When we're out in the world, you maybe, those that are good at this can carry some of that with them inside, at the same time engage coherently with others. So that part of that fluidity maybe is moving from one to the other a bit.
Would you say that if you peel off enough layers of this onion, in the extreme, you would get to the experience that you described of looking in through the teepee and seeing nothing? Would that be an extreme?
I think that would be an extreme, yes. And that's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama was saying, the extreme of nihilism, yes. And the other extreme is this fixed, so-called.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah. So it would be somewhere in between there, probably much closer to the, I mean, when we're more evolved, and I'm not, but when we're more evolved, probably much closer to that place of that nothing exists. It's not there, but closer to that extreme. So Kyepsi Tushik Rinpoche, who passed a number of years ago, was one of my close lamas. I was with him in a very small group with one or two, or maybe two or three other people, and he was talking about, and he was a great lama and had great experience, recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many, many other great lamas. And he said that in his practice, that things were very, very close to that nihilistic edge for him, very, very close. So, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just relaying something I heard directly from a great, great master. Yes.
Thank you, Barry.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. We are getting more hands, so I will make sure that we will have time for all. So Neisha, if I pronounce your name well.
That was perfect, and that was the first time that someone pronounced it perfectly the first time. I'm joining from sunny Pittsburgh today, so I'm calling from home. I have a question, and I think it builds from all of the questions that have been asked before. What you described at the beginning sounded to me like the attainment of that sense of oneness obtained during contemplation, which is a fabulous state. How do you personally balance that with personally with the daily demands and the automatic responses of needing to express yourself through an identity? We talked a little bit in the previous questions, how do you manage others? But I wonder internally, how do you manage that yourself?
Thank you, Neisha. It's a lovely, lovely question. I'm not special. so I don't know. uh, the Buddha taught two truths, right? When the Buddha talked about wisdom, he said there's these two aspects of reality. One is conventional, based in language and thought, and another one that is deeper or beyond or, free from language and thought, so-called ultimate reality, and the first one more what he called conventional reality. And I think from what I understand, I have very little experience, but from what I understand, that as we deepen our practice of this ultimate reality, if you will, beyond center, beyond edge, and we begin to, then we go back, out of our so-called more formal meditation and back into the world, then we're more dealing with language, thought, conventional reality. Sometimes when we're a little more immersed in our meditation for a period of time, maybe in retreat or, other things not disturbing as much, some of that can carry over into when we're not formally meditating. We can feel a little bit of that home, if you will. There's a term which I, kind of like. Again, I have very little experience, but it's rochik, one taste. And you kind of have that little feeling or that experience that everything has this sense of being, it's not the same, but it's an experiential thing, it's hard to put words to it. And I like that term, rochik, one taste. Whether that everything is one, I'm not sure, but I think, so that can carry over sometimes a little bit. And the more it carries over, according to the great practitioners in the texts, then our experience of that conventional reality begins to change. So we still use thought and language, but we're becoming convinced that what appears is actually false, that it is not correct. Even though it still appears.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Nesha.
I'm turning to Carla Medrano. I'm not sure if you have a video availability or you would just ask your question. Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and Barry for this opportunity. It's not usual for me to be able to talk about this, and I'm worried that I'm going to sound completely delusional, but I will try. So it was very nice that you mentioned, Barry, your experience about how you see the view part of the experience, how it looks like you're looking out from inside. I can relate to that, so that was useful for me to hear. And I wanted to ask, I've noticed that, because I noticed this, I'm riding my bike and it's my bicycle, so I'm in the Netherlands, by the way, so it's like I am looking out and I see the hands and the handle on the bike. And then sometimes I hear the trees, I guess, the leaves of the trees higher, and I don't think about it, but I'm immediately over there. The leaves moving with the air, if that makes sense. And when I experienced that, I started to remember the Japanese poems about nature and the leaf of grass, and started to go read that again, because I was trying to understand what was happening. So it's a little bit of a, sometimes I think when the experience is not centered and there is something around that pulls your experience, it's more like my experience is not centered in me, but it could be centered in the tree leaves, or it can be centered in my house plants, to be honest. Also, it doesn't have to be amazing nature. And so I wonder if this is so that if we can, experience ourselves not as ourselves, as Carla, as this human, but as some nature body that is around us, and or if I'm just imagining things.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carla. It's a beautiful question and beautiful experience. I do not think you're delusional, as you started, you know. And I think we're embodied in so many things beyond this physical body. And it sounds like you're recognizing that, you're tapping into that, and that's very beautiful. Please do be a little careful when you're riding your bicycle, to also be on the bicycle and not just in the sound of the wind through the leaves of the trees, but maybe both. Yeah, I think that's very lovely. It sounds like you're allowing yourself, maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally, maybe it's just happening, to be more expansive in terms of the mind and the experience, to be, embodied in things beyond, if you will, this physical body. And I think that's very beautiful. It can be liberating. I think we want to be a little careful, not to maybe, a little bit like a child with an imaginary friend. I mean, it's all wonderful stuff, but we want to maybe not be that in those places all the time. To keep our, social context and friends and, all that, which I think is very important. So I think it's a very lovely experience, and I'm really honored that you shared, because you started by saying, you thought you might be delusional, and then you said this is something you don't normally talk about. So I really appreciate your feeling safe and courageous to talk about this stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Indeed, it was a wonderful, wonderful sharing of experience. Marika.
Hi, Barry. Very nice to see you in the virtual space again. Another voice from the another voice from the Netherlands. And I would agree with the advice to also be careful on the bicycle, because it can be quite dangerous in this country on a bicycle, but also lovely. But my question is really asking about whether you could share some thoughts on the identity in the embodied versus in the virtual world, because we so far, I think, been talking a lot about the embodied world, the bicycle, for example, but in the past couple of years, of course, we've been in a way also very much living in the virtual world. And what I very much appreciate about you is also you are quite active on social media. I very much appreciate those posts. I find them very inspiring. And we talked a little bit at the beginning also about how in social media, in a way, we are constructing an identity, which in one sense also has a sense that there we already know that the identity is not fixed, it's fluctuating because we're constructing it. And at the same time, maybe it is something about that's magnifying our ego, at least that's what's said a lot. So there's, I think, quite a few dimensions to this idea. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We've been doing this for, at least during COVID, for about 2 years now. And so it's kind of feeling like more of the norm, it's getting habituated, getting familiar with this more virtual presence, virtual identity, virtual interaction. I think it's a space, at least my involvement is primarily a space that's quite positive. And occasionally there's a negative sort of reaction, but not very often. And, it's kind of seems healthy. It seems healing in many ways. I think as a teacher, and I do a lot of teaching in various sort of forms, if you will, one has to be always vigilant that the ego doesn't begin to get stroked, because you get a lot of good feedback, and you can think, well, I'm, special. I'm, getting all this good feedback. So one has to be always vigilant. So there's something that some of the lamas will do. I believe His Holiness does this, maybe quietly, before you get on a teaching, it could be a throne or a chair, it doesn't matter, right? But assume that position physically of being a teacher, you snap your fingers and you try to remember that a teacher is relative to people that are, listening, and it requires both. And there's nothing special about one or the other. And to try to, and then you can, if you want, you do a very quick practice of letting go of this solid identity, of this ego, and then remember the love and the compassion and the equality. It doesn't always work, but you try. So in that way, I'm not sure that the virtual identity and the virtual relationship stuff is that much different in that way from in person, so to speak. I don't know. Did I answer the question? I'm not sure that I was on target there.
Yeah, those are very helpful reflections. I think my question was also not a very clear question. It was just more like some free associations with the ideas of virtual versus the embodied identity. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your lovely dance. Over the years, through Mind and Life, I would see you, often by yourself somewhere, just doing little dance movements and stretching, and it was just so beautiful, and that really sticks with me. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Marika. Michelle, we have Michelle Bitbol here with us, so it's your turn. We can't hear you yet. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. Okay. Do you hear me? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, it's really a joy to see you on the screen, dear Barry. It's really for you that I came and heard all your interventions, and I thank you also for sharing your experience, which is really precious. Now, I would like to ask you something. I would like to ask you a philosophical question, of course. When I read your full summary, I thought of a celebrated sentence by the Renaissance philosopher and mystic Nicholas of Cusa, who said, God is the circle whose circumference is everywhere and whose center is nowhere. And so it's so close to what you said in your summary that I thought, okay, maybe this means that, when a mystic of this kind speaks of God, he's just speaking of the best and the deepest part of himself, of his experience, and also of the best part of his ideal of himself. And so I was wondering whether you can connect this experience you have about edge and center and this metaphorical characterization of God by Nicholas of Cusa.
It's also very beautiful to see you, even virtually, to see you, Michelle, and to listen to you. I feel very close to you, and I also was hearing this question that you posed from the perspective of quantum physics. You didn't use that terminology, but to me, there's some resonance there, particularly what they call the Copenhagen school. And you know this tons better than I do, where there really is no objective reality. And in that sense, kind of nothing fixed in any place or time or both. But you didn't ask that question. You wanted something more about God and experience. And yeah, I mean, we always have to be careful when we use terminology, because sometimes similar terminology in different traditions can lead us to believe, oh, the meaning is the same. So we have to be careful and try to delve a little deeper into what are the meanings of the particular terms that are being used, to see if in fact it's more than just similar terminology, but actually similar meaning. So I can't do that with this mystic, because I don't know this mystic. I haven't read about this mystic and his or her experience. You posed this as a philosophic question.
Yes, it's just well, in fact, it was just for the pleasure of discussing with you, essentially.
Okay. Lovely.
And also,
well, let me say this, Michelle. Let me say this. I have very little experience on this stuff. Please don't conclude this is the way I live. This is the way I practice. It's not that way. These are just little hints here and there.
yes.
And so I thought it was lovely. It just came out in the rambling, if you will, about this topic. It's nothing more than that.
Yes, thank you very much. It's really, this is all the more precious for us, because your exploration give us an idea of what we can do, and maybe with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in person, Michel.
Thank you, Michel, indeed. And actually, Father Francis Tiso has just posted a note in the chat. I'm not sure if you are in the position to share that loud. I can read it out, of course, if you wish. I just want to wait for a second if you can come and share your note yourself, Father Francis.
Yeah, can you see me? Oh, there I am.
Yeah, wonderful. So please, because I think what Michel was sharing was very much indeed, very much close to what Barry was talking about, and you are underlying that with your note. So please explore that or elaborate that further.
Yeah, when Milarepa talks about Mahamudra experience, he uses the same terminology that Barry used about center and periphery. There is neither center nor periphery because, of course, there is a sense of one taste, Ro Ching, and really Nicholas of Cusa, who was quite interested in the fact that so many people that he had met, Jews and Muslims in particular, had this experience of openness, had this experience of a wide, vast, unlimited vision that was immersed in the absolute, in God. This is where he was able to develop this idea of the coincidence of opposites, that is, different assertions, but they coincide in this vast expanse. And that certainly sounds like what the Dzogchen people talk about, and it does sound like what Milarepa was getting at with his comments about center and periphery in the Upadesha, the Nandak on Mahamudra. So it is quite fascinating to hear our friend Michel bringing this up because it does sound like one of the areas where there is a certain common resonance among the mystical and philosophical traditions. Nicholas of Cusa was a Catholic mystic and very important figure in the 15th century. He was made cardinal by, I think it was Pope Pius II, and was very important in the dialogue with the Muslims. at that time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
He was
Father
also a
Francis.
scientist, by the way. He was also a scientist, and almost in the modern sense. So kind of interesting guy.
Cool. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that the Buddha was a scientist. Not talking about tools necessarily, but approach, how the mind approaches situations, more of a logical reasoning, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the experience of these great mystics, including Milarepa, and I mean, these are far, far, far beyond any kind of experience that I have, even though we can sometimes use similar words. So, I mean, I can't even comment on an experience that Milarepa or this acoustic, mystic experience. But it is very interesting. And sometimes His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that, particularly within Buddhism now, but maybe we could go beyond that. But he says within Buddhism, there are many different approaches, as you know very well, Father Francis. I mean, there is the almost more mystical approach of Zen and Mahamudra and Dzogchen versus a more analytical, intellectual approach, which at some point gets dropped from the Madhyamaka perspective, but it sort of gets us in the right ballpark, if you will, or the right direction. Otherwise, we could, delude ourselves for a long time and still hold on to the ego tight and not be very loving and compassionate, which is where it's all leading. So yeah, I mean, His Holiness says that there are a number of different roads or paths that lead to the same destination. And, I mean, for someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama to say that, he says it from experience. I can't, I mean, if I say that, it would be intellectual. It would be, and parroting someone I've heard like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who I very much, have great confidence and faith in, but it would not be from my own experience.
Thank you so much, Barry, and thank you, Michelle and Father Francis, for this exchange as well. I think what is important to us, besides studying history and literature and philosophy and great texts from both and all traditions, is to also come back to our own experience and rediscover and re-embody and rejuvenate those experiences from the ancient mystics or from the enlightened masters, to have an internal relationship to these realizations. And that's what we saw, what we heard today from you, Barry, that you shared a very intimate personal journey of realization and discovery around these notions on your own. You said this term, on its own or on his own, on your own. And that's beautiful. Of course, not on your own, because you had friends and masters and teachers and lamas around. And that's what we are so grateful all the time, that we have these people around like you today. So I would just like to express so deep gratitude to you for sharing your journey, your learning, your realization from a very intimate personal perspective, which made it very clear and sharply clear to us all, I think, what you are looking for and what you are sharing with us. It was a great teaching. And I would just like to maybe turn back to Amy, if you have anything to add or share, or maybe conclude.
Yes, I would also like to thank you, Barry, for sharing this experience, which is what will remain, I think, in our minds and in our imaginations as the center of this offering that you've given us. If we can talk about centers, I was also thinking, when I was thinking about centers and peripheries, that there's this notion of a horizon, which I really like. A horizon is a horizon from a single perspective. So it's the circumference or the periphery of our, but it's also an opening. So a horizon is a limit, and it's also a point of opening up of possibilities and of the possibility of a beyond, maybe you could say. So I think you've brought us to that point, to that horizon in your talk, in your beautiful, humble way. And so thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Amy.
Once again, thank you, Barry, and thank you all. Before concluding, I would just like to hand the floor back to Johanna regarding some upcoming events.
Thank you so much, Gabor, and thank you again, Barry, for this beautiful sharing and dialogue. So we have a few more online events that you're welcome to attend. Some of them are public, some of them are specifically for the MLE Friends community. The first one anyone can sign up for will be happening this weekend in partnership with Upaya Zen Center in the US. It'll be from May 28th to 29th. It's the Varela International Symposium, which is really taking contemporary scholars' perspectives on the work and legacy of Francisco Varela. And so we have a really exciting lineup of faculty members who will be sharing their work throughout this online symposium, which includes Roshi Joan Halifax, who's the abbot of Upaya Zen Center, Richard Davidson, Amy Cohen Varela, our own chair of the board, Evan Thompson, John Dunn, Sensei Al Kosniak, Adam Frank, Abiba Berhan, Ezekiel DePaulo, and Hannah De Jaeger. So if you're interested in joining this weekend symposium, you can sign up on the Upaya Zen Center website. And for our MLE Friends community, we have a special webinar with Dr. Fabienne Picard, who is a neurologist, a neuroscientist, and she'll actually be talking about some of her core research in the area of epilepsy and as it relates to ecstatic experience. So that'll be on June 8th at 6 p.m. Central European Summer Time. And finally, a public talk, which is open to everyone. And this is the final talk in this season of the Francisco and Friends series. We'll be having Dr. Sergio Neuenschwander join us from Brazil, offering some of his reflections on working with Francisco Varela early on in his career as a neuroscientist. And that'll be on June 15th at 6 p.m. And we'll have French interpretation available by our friend Geneviève Amné. So please feel free to join us. And thank you again to Barry and to all of you for the wonderful dialogue, and have a good rest of the evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you happen to be.